G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. Today we're talking about the big forwards, the premium forwards, and most of them are value. So we're going to talk about all the big dogs. Let's go.
Just done it from nowhere. Hoisted the goal from inside the centre. Sheed from the boundary. Dusty. Teddy. Petrarca. Oh, wow. How good is that? The legend becomes immortal.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. My name is Mitch Casey and you can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. Luke, how are you, mate?
Good, mate. Good. It's a beautiful day here in sunny Queensland and we get to talk some value forwards, so
Absolutely.
Can't complain.
Where can everyone find you on Twitter?
Luke Rojo17 raised the bat last episode and I'm pushing towards the 200. So
it's snowballing.
When it rains, it pours. Continue to try and put some stuff up there and
Yeah, for sure. Fun. Before we move on to talking forwards, because obviously we're going to break down a lot of the forwards players today, which, of course, most of them are value. So a little bit different this week. We won't be doing a value premiums and an overvalued premiums because really most of these guys at the top here at least present some sort of value. So we're just going to go through all the major options there today.
Yeah.
But that little fraction at the front there.
I almost forgot to talk. Oh, geez, I almost blown it up.
Yeah.
What's going on? 3 out of 3, mate.
Right?
It's happened.
All the boys are on board.
All the boys. Calvinator came across. They confirmed they were playing with us a little bit. I think you're now 3 of 3 as well.
I am 3 of 3 as of this morning.
As of this morning, yeah. So some people might have seen out there on Twitter. Roy was definitely playing with you. Put a little Pikachu GIF, I think, on one of your tweets, just suggesting that he didn't want to be caught.
This one goes out to you, Roy.
Whoa!
We've got to catch them all.
I didn't know that was coming. That shocked me as much.
Well, there we go. We've got to catch them all. We've caught them all. So
little audio
sights now set on you, Selby, the GOAT. If we've knocked off the traders, Selby, we want you on board next, following us on Twitter. So, I appreciate to the boys over the traders. They do great stuff.
That audio bite has me shook, mate. You just had that little surprise waiting for me, didn't you?
I did.
Well
I
done.
want to see how you react. But yeah, got them all. And shout out to you traders. Make sure you guys check out all of their content. Obviously, very easy to find. Once you're done listening here, of course.
And we've said it before, but really appreciate the work they do, not only for the people making the content, but just also for fantasy in general. Yeah. So approachable, so friendly. They've reached out to us, and just really genuine guys. So appreciate that.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's get stuck into the forward line. Now, like we sort of said off the top, a lot of value in this forward line, and compared to maybe our defenders and rucks, which we're going to talk about next week, but lots of options here to choose from, and it's sort of, I guess the overall question I want to ask first off is how many can you sneak into your team?
I was thinking that when I was doing the research. I was going to kind of throw that question at you as well. If you wanted to be super, super aggressive, you could almost start with a forward line that's, got 4 or 5 genuine undervalued premiums. There's a world where you can see that happening. So this is a very, very exciting list to talk about, and I'm just so keen to get into it.
So I think the question is not necessarily like who's got value, but it's who has the most value and who is maybe maybe the safest, who has the highest upside. So some of them may seem like obvious picks, but again, it's about how many can you choose from. I think 3 to 4 is probably what most people will go. At the moment, I'm rocking with 4 in my forward line that I would consider to be premiums. Maybe 1 mid-pricer and a rookie in there. I think that's a pretty common structure. Just off the top here, we won't be covering a Darcy Cameron in today's show. We're going to leave him for the rucks. Just obviously probably a bit more content to throw into the rucks. There's a few things to talk about there, and the forwards will just be sticking with those guys. But let's start at the top. The number 1 guy on a price, Josh Dunkley. Moving up to the Sunshine State over here and joining the Brisbane Lions. He averaged 108.8 points last season, priced at $963,000, and we still have him. I mean, at least in my mind, I still think he's got a bit of upside, bit of value.
Yeah, it's hard to get your head around that you've got a guy that's priced at almost 110, and you can still see, you can still almost confidently see a scenario where he goes significantly higher than that. So, in terms of the upside for Dunkley, a lot of people will know this already, but a lot of the upside comes from this trade to the Lions and what we suspect his role to be like at the Lions. So it's kind of common knowledge that while he was at the Doggies, there's obviously many talented midfielders there, and he was just one of them. So he spent a lot of time off half forward and playing in the midfield. But he's unique in the sense that even when he's playing at half forward, he just finds the ball. He's a fantasy freak. And so what a lot of people are thinking this year is, hey, if he's going to the Lions and he goes from sort of your 40 to 50% CBAs up to 70, 80% CBAs, if that correlates in an increase in scoring, that is just like scary stuff. Hey, Mitch.
He's one of the highest upside players in fantasy, full stop, no matter what the position. We have seen it in stretches with him in the past. Like if I go back to his breakout season in 2019, averaged 101.1. But even if you break that season down, there was a season of two halves. Yeah, so 111.
111, okay.
111, but he was playing predominantly as a forward for the first 6 rounds, and from round 7 onwards, round to the last round, so big sample size, he actually went at an average of 121. So over a large portion of the season, he's got a 120 average ceiling, in my opinion, if he does play as a full-time midfielder. So different to maybe like a Doherty, a Rory Laird, which we've labelled as overpriced in the past. He is the top dog in his line that I still think that of all of them is probably the must-have guy you got to pay up for, because I think that he could easily separate himself from the next best guy, and on top of that has a bit of upside that, 10 points, you could even say that he can go higher than his average.
In recent history, he's shown that as well. At the start of last year, first 7 games of last year, he went at 121. So it's not like these stats that we're pulling are kind of isolated incidents. He's shown that he's got pedigree to go up into those 120s. And he's not the kind of player that when you watch him, you think, oh, he's really had to have an amazing game to get to 120. He's really stretched to get to 120. Just does it in all facets. He's a tackler. He works hard. He gets marks around the ground. He'll get in and under. And he'll even get on the scoreboard when he goes forward. He has a happy knack of bobbing up for some marks inside 50, doesn't he? So for his height. He's a crazy good player. And I think even at 963k, I think you can confidently justify picking him in your team.
Is he a must-have?
Not for me, not in my opinion, but I certainly wouldn't be turning my nose up at people who have picked him. Yeah. So when you say must-have, you kind of...
It's a bit of a loaded question, I think.
Yeah, that's all right. In my head, I think, must-have is like you will not make top 100 without this player starting in your squad. And for me, that's a no. You can start without him in your squad, and you can make top 100. Do I think he's a must-have at some point during the season? Yeah.
I think that's 100% believe so.
That's obvious.
But I'm sort of saying that again, a loaded question. I subscribe to the fact that I don't believe there is ever such thing as a must-have in AFL fantasy. But, really, retrospectively, the must-haves are usually the rookies. Like, if you didn't have Nick Dacos last year, you were never going to get anywhere close to doing well in your season. So the must-haves in terms of premiums and things like that, I think gets thrown around a lot. Josh Dunkley, again, sometimes we pay up for these guys, and as good as we think that they are, they might start off slow or whatever. Injuries might come around and things like that. But in terms of consistency of ceiling, we've seen him do it in the past for big stretches. He is obviously a forward-eligible player. He's done 110s, 120s in the past with 50% CBAs. Do we expect, at the Brisbane Lions, is he, if we're predicting, is he 70+% CBAs? I know that maybe that's the assumption, but you've still got Lachie Neale. Jared Lyons has talk about him returning back to the midfield. He was maybe carrying an injury last season. I don't know how much I'm sort of reading into that. Hugh McCluggage, they like to get some of those other Rainers types and stuff in there.
The Lions are an interesting one. I think in a way you can talk about them similar to how we spoke about Essendon on the previous podcast, is you go through a lot of their midfielders and you don't think, wow, that midfielder could be a great forward. With the exception of someone like a Cam Rayner, he can,
Yes.
And then obviously Zach Bailey sometimes spends time in the midfield and goes forward. But when you look at guys like Lyons and Neale, obviously you don't say, hey, that's going to be a great forward. So I think he goes 70% CBAs. I'd be pretty shocked if
I think he's at 50. Least 50.
Which is what he went last year.
Which is what he went last year, so I think that there's no real risk of him burning you, to put it that way, with the upside that he has 10 points of ceiling on top of his head. So I think it's probably likely that he goes to 70 or 65%. but maybe not a certainty. I think maybe a lot of people are just shoehorning him in there, but I do pause a little bit because, we saw Jared Berry go in there at the stretches last season, and that actually worked really well. I think he was playing well as a tagger in a couple of those games. What's Zorko doing this season? Zach Bailey is a guy that sometimes they like to get in there. Yeah. There's a few different things, but I think that he does provide something that the Lions don't have, which is that defensive minding, really great tackler, but can also spread, whereas, Neil, maybe Lions are a bit more of those sort of accumulators.
It's been pretty well publicised as well that he's been talking about wanting to give the Lions a defensive-minded edge. Yeah. You've probably read some of those articles as well. Have you seen any photos of him?
Yeah, he's looking good.
He's got the
tan as well,
yeah,
which my girlfriend seems to be very excited about.
The sun's doing him wonders. I felt emasculated looking at some of the photos, actually. So, we won't let Ellie or Brooke anywhere near.
Yeah, no. Okay, let's move on. So I think he's a pretty good pick. I think, like I said, he's in my team right now. I think he is going to be a very popular. I think he might be the second most popular player in fantasy right now at time of recording. But that's by no means to say he's a must roster guy or must have guy. But I think it's pretty darn close. It's a very safe pick, captain option in my opinion. I think you could easily whack a VC or C on him, especially maybe after that first game we confirm the fact that he's in there 60-70% of the time. So I think that he's one of the few top line guys that I'm very happy to pay out for. Who have we got next?
What about our second fella on the list, Stephen Cornelio?
Stephen Cornelio, the Giant.
He is. Now, he had an interesting season last year, didn't he? Because there was a lot going on at GWS. So we had, some poor performance. We ended up with a coach being moved on, a caretaker coach coming in, and it was really, I guess, a tale of two halves in a lot of ways for Stephen Cornelio. And anyone who's done any digging into him will see that his scoring is directly linked with CBAs.
It is.
He's just one of your typical midfielders. So he's not like Dunkley in the fact that when he goes and plays half forward, he will still score big for you.
Can't save his scores, really.
Exactly. So any time you're looking to have Stephen Cornelio in your team, you're anticipating that he's going to be getting CBAs.
Yeah.
So at the end of last season, there was a 7-game stretch. This was not quite to finish the year, but at the end of the season, 7-game stretch where he averaged 118. In that time, 70% CBAs.
Yeah.
Prior to that, not even close to 70% CBAs, and the scoring showed it as well. Yes. But a guy who can average 118, that always just pricks your hiss up.
It does sort of get you listening a little bit. I think sometimes Stephen Cornelio, I don't know what it is about him, but there's a part of me that hesitates with Cornelio. I think he's going to
check how old he is.
No, he's 29. Okay, so he still makes the rule just, but I think I don't know. I've seen there's been a couple of seasons in the past where he hasn't lived up to our expectation. He's done 111, I think, back in, if I just pull it up, 110 back in 2018. Again, a little while ago now.
To be fair, in those seasons, it almost appeared as though his coach was bullying him. If you watch the what was the documentary? I can't recall the name.
Was it Making Your Mark? Is that the one?
Yeah, that was a bit of
so maybe now that the coach is gone, he might have a new lease on life, enjoy playing his footy a bit more.
Yeah,
who
potentially.
knows? But I just there's something that makes me hesitate, and I think that sometimes we see the parallels between him scoring well in the midfield and not scoring well as a forward, and we you threw out that stat. What was it? 118 in the last.
118, and not in the last 7 games, but in a 7-game span towards the end of the year. So there were.
So I think that's sometimes maybe a trap that a lot of people fall into is they like to pick and choose their data sample. If that makes sense. Yeah. So you've referenced a very specific kind of 7-game stretch. So yes, he can go big for a decent stretch of time. But the stat that I want to throw out there is when he averaged more than 50% CBA. So I'm only taking the games where he averaged more than 50%, which in total averages out to be 66% CBAs. He averaged 107. So still obviously lots of value. He's priced at 98. So 107, a little bit less exciting than that 118. And then, of course, the other thing that has me a little bit concerned, like we've talked about with a few of the Giants before, new coach, new game style.
The Richmond factor.
Does that maybe drop those scores at 29? Obviously, he's not the youngest guy that we're talking about today. I sort of have him going under that 107 mark, maybe closer to sort of between 100 and 105.
Yep.
Now, again, when we talked about all these guys being value, my next question is Stephen Coniglio, the best value out of all these guys.
So he's priced at
And right
98.
now I think that maybe there might be some better options.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Mitch. So he's priced at 98, and like Mitch just said, he's kind of anticipating him to maybe go somewhere in that 105 to 107 range.
100 to 105.
Okay, sorry, in that range, yeah. So, yeah, there is data, like we said, to suggest that when the CBAs go up, the scoring also goes up. But remember, that's playing in GWS's old system as well. Mm-hmm. So is playing in Adam Kingsley's new system with potentially, I think everyone's kind of acknowledging there might be a bit of a Richmond style to it. Does that hurt his scoring? Now, he's never been a huge marks guy. I mean, he kind of averages sort of around his 3 to 4 marks a game, which is not high in terms of what some players do.
Some can get double digits regularly. So
I think there is still, a good scenario where he's playing high CBAs, he's getting his tackles, he's getting his touches, he likes to kick the footy rather than handball it as well. Yeah, I'm kind of with Mitch on this one. I don't see him going under 98, but when we continue down this list, I think there's guys with bigger upside.
Yeah.
For greater context as well, I picked that 7-game span out, but I just quickly went through, if you look at his last 12 games of the season, okay, there's only 3 games where he went under 100, and those scores were 92, 88, and 80.
Yeah.
So I think if you kind of took
Pretty
that
consistent.
last 12 games, you'd be somewhere around that like 110 average, without me doing the math real quick here.
Yeah, so I think I also included at the start of the season, there was a few games, obviously start of the year as a midfielder, 87 and 98.
Yep.
But then, yes, like you said, so of the games that I sort of sampled, there were 5 games under 100, but again, nothing lower than an 80. So he's obviously going to be right up there into the top 6, but it's like, it's splitting hairs when you're trying to pick 3 or 4 of these guys and there's 6 really good options.
Yeah.
It's just maybe one that I'm maybe willing to take on a little bit, because I think right now, if I look at the ownership percentages, if I pull that up real quick, he's 37% rostered.
Yeah.
So that's pretty high. And I think that, with a few unknowns, a few uncertainties, it's kind of that risk that I'm willing to take with other options to back it up.
Yeah, he could be your kind of point of difference in a reverse way, if you know what I mean.
Point of difference by not having him. Yes. So that's sort of my flag on Stephen Coniglio. I'm very much watching him very closely in the preseason. And again, those stats I referenced was a 66% CBA role. So he could easily be 76, 80% CBAs. It's hard to know with what direction the Giants are going. So still one to watch, definitely. I'm not ruling him out of my team, but I am tempted by the fact that I could take him on in my side.
Now,
who's the next guy? What do we got?
Can I tempt you with his former teammate, Mr. T, Tim Taranto?
Tim Taranto, the Tig.
I'm probably, of all the people we're going to talk about today,
Taranto.
I'm most excited to talk about him. Not necessarily because he's the one I'd pick first, but just because...
Because he plays for Richmond?
Well, yes.
yes.
But I've done a bit of a deep dive on some stats, so I'm excited to share some of those guys with you. But you give us a little bit of intel first. And
well, obviously, if we just talked about... obviously, the role and the game style of the potential change at GWS. Well, Tim Taranto's obviously going to the team that the role, the game style is absolutely there. So, a lot of people are maybe worried about this, concerned about this. The stat is out there that no midfielder has averaged over 100 since 2017 when Dusty had a Brownlow season. Now, again, I think we've spoken a little bit about this in the past. The Richmond's midfielders, maybe outside of Dion Prestia, are probably not renowned for being the highest pedigree in terms of fantasy scoring. Dusty, ever since that season, has just, doesn't care about tackling anymore. Dion Prestia, I reckon, would have averaged 100 if he didn't keep getting bloody injured. So I think that there is absolutely room for a player to go over 100, and I think Tim Taranto is the pedigree of player that could do that.
Yeah,
so
if there's a player who's going to come in and do it, he's kind of the guy. Yeah. Now, I did a deep dive, so
hit me with your dive.
Yeah, I'm going to try not to butcher this, and you might have to try and keep up with me. But, okay, so in 2022, so let's just look at 2022, the Richmond midfielders collectively, how many times do you think a Richmond midfielder scored over 120 in a game?
Out of 22 games?
All the games, all the midfielders, how many times do you think a Richmond... And I'm talking about midfielder. So I took out Jaden Short as a backman.
Okay, yep.
So just tell me, midfielder playing midfield, how many times?
Maybe 11? Like 50%?
3.
Oh, shit.
So 3 times. So when you take out Tom Lynch, had a couple of big scores over 120, Jaden Short as a defender had. So 3 times a genuine Richmond mid scored over 120.
Who were they? Short might have had one in there.
One as a midfielder, maybe. I think there was one where
surely Dion
Prestia might have had one, and then You're stretching me. But
yeah, there
3.
you go. Okay.
Now, just to give it comparison, because, we like to compare.
Yes.
The Bulldogs, how many times do you think they had a midfielder go over 120?
Oh, well, they had 5 guys that averaged over 100, so I'd say...
120, remember. 120, I'm talking. Big
Oh,
scores.
so over 120? Sorry.
120.
Okay.
It's going big.
If they had 3 times it by 5, 15.
You're not far off. So 19.
Okay.
So we're talking about big scoring. And the reason I'm talking about big scoring is because Tim Taranto historically is a guy who's shown he can go big. So
He's
in
got
20,
ceiling.
in 2020, a couple of times big, 2021, and even in 2019, he had huge scores above 120. So to go even further into that stat, so stick with me here.
Yep.
Since 2017 to current, okay, Richmond mids had 37 scores over 120 in that, a 6-year span. Okay, and then almost half of those 37 scores were Dusty, and more than half of those scores were in 2017.
Yes, right.
So if you go from 2018 onwards, Richmond mids have really only scored above 120 15 to 20 times.
Right, geez, okay.
Again, in comparison, the Dogs in that same span, 96 times.
Jeez, okay. Yeah, so it's a big difference. It's obviously...
So this is the question, because people will be asking this question all preseason. Is that system or is it cattle?
Yeah. Is it the players that, obviously, if you didn't have the players, you've got to adopt a certain system, whether or not, if Richmond had a Bontempelli, if Richmond had a Jack McRae in their team, would they still be able to do something like that?
Yeah. So that's the question I'm asking. I don't have an answer to it. Don't hold me exactly to those numbers, because I was kind of scouring through all the stats.
No, it's good stats. Good stats.
Counting on my fingers.
Obviously, we've got a large sample to use that data from. It's not just obviously the last season or two. There's a big stretch of games that we can go from there. I still think now, again, if we talk about role, so obviously we talked about system. If we talk about role, Tim Taranto averaged, if I look at last season, in terms of his CBAs, he was down a little bit. He averaged 44% CBAs.
Yeah, he's going to be higher than that.
He will be higher than that. And on those 44% CBAs, he obviously averaged 95? Yeah, 95.5.
Yeah.
So my question then is, does the game style offset the increase in CBAs, or is the CBAs enough, increase in CBAs enough to overcome that? What are your thoughts?
At this stage, I see him averaging between 105 and 110. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where my head is. Do I think he's going to be coming out and just putting out 130s, 140s for fun? I don't think so. I think the system is enough to kind of negate that, even with a potential increase in CBAs.
Yep.
But what's he valued at the minute, Mitch?
So he's priced at 95.6.
So if he goes
105, that's 10 points of upside. That's a good pick, I think.
And do you agree? 105 is safe for him.
I think that feels about where I've got him pegged at 104. I've just sort of taken a haircut off that, just in case, obviously, the system, that sort of stuff. But I still see him going over 100.
Yeah.
I've got him slightly above a Stephen Cornelio at a cheaper price. So for me, a Tim Taranto is probably more of a lock than a Cogs.
Yeah.
Just because I think that... I think he's just a better player. He's younger. I think that he's probably going to, his role feels really secure in the Richmond team.
Yeah.
And I just think that the pedigree of a Tim Taranto is just good enough to overcome sort of the history that you've laid out. That we've seen so far.
He feels to me that he perfectly fits the mold of player coming to a new club and just wanting to just set the world on fire. He won our time trial, which is no mean feat. I know Camden McIntosh is an elite runner out on the wing. So
Hugo Ralphsmith was up there as well.
Yeah,
so there's a few good runners.
So for me, read into it what you will, but those are positive signs as well. He's coming to make a statement.
And I often... A lot of people might be saying, "Oh, you guys are Richmond fans, you're pumping up the boys." But I actually find that I go the complete opposite way. When I pick a Richmond player, I need to be 100% sure, because I don't want to be
the roller coaster.
I don't want to be watching a Richmond game and cussing out this guy because of my fantasy team. So last year, for example, I didn't start with Jaden Short. I haven't started with Dusty any of the seasons that I've played. It's just. So for me to say that I think Tim Taranto is a great starting pick and he's a Richmond player, I actually think that means more, because I'm more critical, I think, of the Richmond players from a fantasy point of view than maybe the opposite, and pumping those boys up like a Roy with his Blues. So I think
watching Richmond for us is enough of a roller coaster without adding fantasy. I think watching us watch Richmond would be entertainment enough.
Mate, there's a few choice words that get thrown around when people do different things. So I think he's a good pick.
So currently in your team?
He is currently in my team
he's
at
in
the
my
moment.
team.
Yeah, so Tim Taranto and Dunkley sit there at F1 and F2.
Do you want to introduce your love child?
This guy's also in my team.
Is he
right
hiding
now.
in your closet, mate? Have you abducted him?
Yeah, no, not yet. He's small enough for me to abduct him. But
wow.
Dylan Moore is the guy that we're talking about here from the Hawthorn
lead us off,
Footy
mate.
Club.
Tell us
Now,
all about him.
Dylan Moore was a guy that I traded into my team last year. He obviously had a great season, even before, now, and this is the big thing for Dylan Moore, even before he started getting into the centre bounces and playing more of that midfield role. As a forward, I think he was averaging something like 83 or 80 points or something like that as a pure forward player.
And that's why you've said in the past that he kind of reminds you of Dunks a little bit.
He reminds me of like a little mini Dunkley. Like he's obviously lacking a bit of height. Some people have compared him to like a Dane Zorko sort of type. And
I hope he's having his ability.
Well, I think he's a little younger than Zorko. So, and Zorko's had really good seasons in the past from a fantasy point of view.
Yeah.
He's 23. He is ready to take that step. And by all metrics last season, when he got moved into the midfield, statistically, some of the advanced statistics, I think, that ratings that they give players, I don't really know where that comes from, but they had
That's
him.
a champion data thing, I think.
They had him as that elite category. I don't know if there was like that image that came out last year.
And people scoffed at it a little bit, didn't they?
Every team had a few players, and Dylan Moore was one of, I think, 2 Hawks. It was him and it was Sicily in the Hawks as the elite players on their team. And from watching
that early in the year,
from watching him very closely, because I traded him into my team after I saw him average and go into the midfield, and I think he's a really, really good player. He's a dead set gun. He's that guy that, like we said, we want to have in our sides. They get a lot of stats across the board. I think he averaged 6 marks and 4 tackles last year. He put up an average of 93, averaging just 20 disposals. And that, again, with most of the season playing as a forward. So in the last several games, round 17, he started going to the midfield. And from that point on, he averaged 108.8.
Yeah.
So round up to 109.
Yeah.
If you wanted to include the games before that after the bye, averaged 103.
Yeah, but there were a couple, just to build on your stat there, if you do include some of those games after the bye, my understanding is that there's a couple of low scores in there, a 60 and a 56, and one of those was with 70% time on ground. So I don't know what happened in that game, but it's not indicative of his usual kind of scoring output.
Which one are you looking at there? I think you might be somewhere else.
The mark there?
Yeah, I think so.
60 and 56?
No.
Were they pre-bye, were they?
They were pre-bye. So after the bye, his lowest score
83.
was an 83.
Yep, gotcha.
So that was in round 16. And obviously, you're right in assuming, so that was a lower CBA game. So that was 14%.
Yeah. And it was almost at that point where they decided, let's get this guy in the middle.
Get him in
like
there.
You said, it went. And from the reading I've been doing on this fella as well, which maybe people think, this doesn't correlate with fantasy scoring, but I actually think it does. He's the consummate professional. His leadership's now being acknowledged at the Hawks. And while people go, that's got nothing to do with fantasy, I think it actually does, because when you're touted as that kind of person who's a leader at your football club and who's a consummate professional, you're never going to go through a patch in the game where he starts sulking or he drops his head or he
that's what
moves
I look
away
for.
from.
And that's the sort of we talk about, I think I've spoken about that in the past. Like, those are the players that I love to have in my side. Those are the Andrew Brayshaws. Those are the Sam Walshes. Those are the guys that fight through everything, no matter the score. And you're going to need that when you're playing for the Hawks, because I don't think they're going to be, they're not going to be the Melbourne Demons to start the season and go unbeaten for 15 rounds. So I think, and again, we touched on this one as well on previous podcasts, but Tom Mitchell's out.
Yes,
Jaeger O'Meara is out. So there's lots of midfield usage up in the air.
Yeah.
Some people are a bit scared off by maybe because he is such a good forward, maybe he is a bit of a fix-it type that, may not have that consistent and steady role. But I would argue that being 23, he's young enough that he is the future of their midfield.
Yeah.
But he's also old enough that he's got the body to go in there and sort of, I don't think whilst the Hawthorn team is okay blooding a lot of their youth and setting them straight in there, we saw that with Josh Ward, they're not going to have all first and second year players in there. They're going to have at least some mature bodies, and Dylan Moore, I think, is going to be that sort of type. And if we look at the last season, I want to get your take on this as well. So at round 17, he goes 60%, 18, 61, 56, 45, 73% CBAs.
Yep.
And then the last 2 rounds of the season, he went
31,
31 and 29%.
What were Josh Ward's? Let me just go back. I can find this. I'm going to see what Josh Ward's were in those last 2 games.
But my thoughts are there is that the team is obviously, they're going nowhere. They're experimenting a lot. There was a game where Sicily found himself in the midfield.
Yeah, and so context there as well, Ward went at 50% CBAs in the last game. So there's potentially a thing where Sam Mitchell's flicking the magnets around. He says, hey, Dylan, we've seen you play in the midfield. We like what we see, but we're just going to give Josh.
We just want to have a look at these other guys, and give that a go. So for me, that's I expect him to be sort of that at least 50 to 60% CBA sort of a guy, and to me, that's a minimum of 103 in my opinion. I think that's sort of his floor in that role.
And priced at 93, is that an? Well, I know you love
I think
him.
it is.
Yeah,
I think there's huge ceiling. I think there's honestly huge ceiling.
So you think it's a safe 103, which would be 10 points of upside, and you think there's the potential?
I think there's potential for more because just the way there we go. The way that his stat set sort of is, and sort of we love those guys that tackle, we love those guys that mark.
Yeah.
He only had that 129, but that wasn't even his biggest score of the ceiling. He got 138, like we said, playing as a forward with 11 marks and 3 tackles. He can still go forward and kick goals when he is playing that forward, a la Josh Dunkley. So I think that whilst it's a risky pick by the fact that he is actually only rostered or owned in 7% of AFL fantasy teams.
It's a point of difference.
I think that he could be a genuine pod and one pod, that I think that I'm not choosing because of the fact that he is a pod. Yeah. But watching his role, obviously, in pre-season, I think that there is a lot of upside in Dylan Moore.
Mate, you've convinced me. Dylan Moore might need a restraining order against you, but you've convinced me. He's in my team.
I like him. But let's move on to a couple of Port Adelaide boys. Who are we gonna start off first with?
I got Connor. You want to talk about Connor?
Let's talk Connor Rozee.
Let's do it. So, Connor Rozee, I think you have more experience with Connor Rozee because you brought him in at a kind of a prime time for him.
I did, and I was nervous doing it. I think I brought him in. I think I was deciding between him and Mitch Duncan at the time.
Well, there's a reason. Yeah, there's a reason you're nervous doing those kind of things because those Port Adelaide boys have a tendency to. On occasion, drop off the face of the earth. So, I don't know if you remember this, but I actually started with him in my team last year.
That's right, yes.
And immediately traded him out after 21 in the first round, which I think is deserved.
Well, absolutely. It was probably the right call at the time.
If you put out 21, well, it was because he went on to go then 48, 54, 55.
Yeah.
So, he, for me, is in a little bit of the same vein as Cornelio. They're very different players, but in the same vein that if he's not getting CBAs, he ain't scoring anything. So he, in those early season games, 17%, 10%, 0%, 0% for CBAs, and the scores reflected that. Then from that point on, Kenny Hinkley said, let's get this guy in the guts. And from that point in time, he went on to probably go at around 60% CBAs for the rest of the season, and his scoring kind of reflected that, didn't it, Mitch?
Yeah, so he moved into the midfield in round 5. Now, that game was it was like a half-time kind of adjustment, and he had a big game that game. So that was round 5. Only had 33%, but then on after that, went on to average over 60% CBAs. And so from that round 5 onwards, averaged 97.78 points. So round that up to 98 points. Priced at 88. Again, I think that you've got a minimum of 10 points of upside. Yeah. He did finish the season really strong as well. So towards the back half of the season, if I have the stats here in front of me, he had some big ceiling scores highlighted by that last game of the season where he put up 144, kicked a goal, 8 tackles, 4 marks, 34 disposals. So he has shown at least a little bit of ceiling, but he also still has a little bit of those yo-yo scores. So round 21, put up 64. That was still in a high midfield usage role. So it's a tough one because there was also a lot of people like applauding how good he was from a footy sense in the word. So does that attract tags? Is he the kind of type? I don't know if I ever see him going that 70 to 80% CBAs because he is also damaging as a forward. He is probably maybe that 50 to 60% sort of a guy. I
don't know if we're talking tags. I know he's coming off a best and fairest, is my understanding of Port Adelaide. So
there's a few guys in there as well. So you've still got your Ollie Wines. You've still got Travis Boak in there. Who's
I'd have to see what Port Adelaide are doing this year and how much he is killing it to see whether maybe the tag would come. I'm interested, and we can kind of talk about these two fellas in conjunction. Yep. Zach Butters is our next fella, and we'll kind of talk about him a little bit here as well. But he went at 38% CBAs. Do you see him spending more midfield time? Does that drop Rosie's? Does it drop someone else's? Butters can score in other roles he's shown sometimes.
Butters is hard for me to get a grip on. Look, I started with him last year, as did a lot of other coaches, and to start the season it went off really well, 96 and then 137, which was his highest score for the season.
Yeah.
Thought we were on to a massive winner here, and then just kind of fizzled out a little bit. He's kind of that type, a lot of commentary on the way he plays and in the fact that he plays so aggressive that it leads to injuries and little nicks that he picks up throughout the season, and perhaps that led to his scoring kind of fizzling out in that middle part of the season. But again, his last sort of 4 games, all tons, 103, 116, 114, 121. And a lot of those games weren't high CBAs either. They were sort of 30s. 44, 37, 31, 48. So I don't think he relies on the CBAs quite as much as a Rosie, and I think he might have maybe a higher ceiling, but...
Yeah. There's really no
it's
rhyme.
nerve-wracking.
Yeah, and you mentioned this on an episode earlier on, was that you can't really find a rhyme or reason, and that, for me, is nervy. Like, it's a bit like Dan Houston. He can have, or Butters could have a 44 with 80% CBAs, and then he could go 130 with 10% CBAs, and you're like, well, hang on, how do I pick role? How do I work out what's the go? So, of the two of them, Rosie...
Yeah, I think Rosie's probably the guy that has proved it over a longer stretch of time, so you maybe have a little bit more confidence. Zach Butters still has that, allure of, he's been talked about as, a future club captain. Some people are touting him as, a future Brownlow medalist winner. They're both 22 and 23 years old, so perhaps some of that inconsistency, maybe a bit different to a Dan Houston, is just putting it down to the fact that he's a little bit younger, still, obviously. How many games does he play? So it'll be his 5th season this year. So relatively new to the AFL compared to some other guys like that. But there's something that intrigues me about a Zach Butters. But again, it's not someone who if I have in my side right now, I'm not sort of locking him in there. I might be shifting and moving around that spot to sort of see what else I can fit. And we talked about this before, but sometimes if that little bit of extra money going from a Connor Rosie down to a Butters, is that just a little bit enough to get me up to something that I want in another line, then I'm okay with doing that. But again, big preseason watch. I wonder what they're going to do with the Travis Boak. Is he maybe playing a bit more forward? Where does a Willem Drew fit in this team? He soaked up a lot of CBAs there, and some people have sort of said that he might even be outside looking in on the team, maybe used a bit more as a sub. I'm not too sure.
Unknowns.
Obviously, Carl Amon is out of the side now, so a few more wing minutes available as well. So there's a few things to watch here with this Port Adelaide team. So I can't confidently kind of say yes or no with both of these guys one way or another at the moment.
Yeah. Of the two, I'm probably more Rosie, but there are some things to watch. I read an article too. Connor Rosie apparently went to the US of A to see a human movement expert. And movement's pretty important in AFL, so I'm glad he saw an expert.
Could have just come and see me. Come on, Connor. I'll sort you out.
But Swanee went to the US a few times, didn't he? And we know how Swanee racked it up. So it's a stretch, but I think Rosie is the new Swan.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There you go. You heard it here first, guys. Big call of the podcast.
Mate, they both went to the USA.
Average 125.
Human movement expert. He's got to be. So.
Yeah. So I think for both of them, they're big watches for me right now. I think obviously again both upside. I sort of have a Rosie, a Butters, a Cogs, all kind of fighting for that 4th spot in my side. I sort of feel the most comfortable about a Taranto and a Dunkley. I think are pretty safe. Moore is maybe my bigger call, my bit of sort of risk, but in terms of how I feel about him right now, if he has the role that I expect him to have, I feel good about him. Yeah. And then those other 3 are kind of in and out depending on what they sort of look like for the preseason. But again, let us know what your thoughts are. Obviously, a lot of guys we're talking about here all have good upside, and obviously a lot of people have different preferences in terms of what they're looking for. We've got one more guy that we're going to talk about here, which is maybe a bit of an outside pick. I think the guys we've spoken about are probably the most considered. Just want to highlight Errol Goulden of the Sydney Swans, 20 years old, averaged 83 last year, and he did that on very minimal CBAs on a really good Sydney team. Only his 2nd year in the AFL, I want to say. And he just has, again, we talk about Dylan Moore, that spread out kind of stat, tackles, marks, disposals. He looks really good as a football player.
Yeah.
And potentially, 10% CBAs last year, could that rise to 30, 40%.
That's it.
It's hard to find in this kind of a stacked Sydney team, but when you're already averaging 83 on 10% CBAs and you're 20 years old, I think it is definitely something we have to have a look at in case that does change.
Yeah, the more I did some digging into Errol Goulden, the more positive signs I found. So he was second in the Swans time trial the other day, and we know that kind of elite running typically correlates with being able to find the footy over the stretch of a game.
Yep.
Like Mitch just mentioned, 10% CBAs. And for someone to average 82 on 10% CBAs it's pretty impressive.
In your second year in the AFL.
Yeah.
That's very impressive.
He kicks it more than twice as much as he handballs it.
We like that.
Which we like.
Yeah.
He played all the games last year. And just in my mind, if he gets more CBAs, that could potentially mean some proper upside.
Yeah.
There was one enormous score in there. He had a 155. But if you go back and actually have a look at that game, they dismantled GWS and it was just a mark fest.
It was absolutely a destruction. So
yeah,
I don't know.
It's an outlier.
It is an outlier, but it is good to see at least that he has that ceiling. He kicked 2 goals, had 12 marks in that game, which is obviously a huge source of his points. But it is nice to see. And well, there's not to say that Sydney might not destroy a few more teams this season. They obviously made the grand final last year, and
for fantasy.
But just a name to watch. I think I wouldn't. It'd be a bold person to go out and pick him for your classic side.
Yeah.
If he does show that he's going into the midfield, maybe you could have a go there. But again, Sydney tricked us last year with Isaac Heaney and his promise of more midfield time last year. So it does always fill me with a bit of risk. And when we've got those sort of safer options up top, I probably don't think that the risk is worth it enough. But again, it wouldn't shock me if he comes out and he is the guy that sort of really pops this year in his third year.
And if you've got any intel on Sydney or you're a Swans fan and you can see that there's a real shift to increase Errol's CBAs, we'd love to hear about it. And while Mitch mentioned Isaac Heaney just before as well, we probably won't do an overpriced forwards podcast.
Yeah.
There's just not enough guys to talk about. A lot of the top premium forwards are good value. But
I don't think anyone's picking Isaac Smith. I don't think anyone's picking
And you
Heaney
mentioned
again.
Isaac Heaney. I think we've been fooled too many times. If Heaney was a midfielder, then he'd be a great fantasy player, but he's shown he's a damaging forward. So, don't be holding your breath for an overpriced premium forwards pod.
Yeah. I think a lot of those guys are the popular picks, and a lot of them are respectable picks, and I don't think that at this stage on January 22nd, I can confidently say that, any of them are bad picks.
Yep.
It's about sifting through the preseason and who are going to be the best picks. How many can you have? I say that you can have as many as 4. Maybe you can even hide one in your midfield if you really like all of them.
I've seen a few people hiding, well, not hiding, but Dunkley in the midfield, I've seen.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, just real briefly? I'm personally not a big fan, but I can't really articulate why. Maybe there's just a lot of midfielders that I also really like. So
yeah, when you can pick him as a forward, it kind of feels dirty to pick him as a mid.
It does,
But if you're looking at your team balance and for whatever reason you find that having Dunkley in your midfield helps with your team, maybe people are saying there's so many good forward options to pick from. Hey, I need to pick Dunkley in the midfield, and if that's your justification.
That is the justification I hear.
Because I think you can pick. So your forwards could fill up pretty quick. So if you pick we'll talk about these guys in the next pod, but if you pick like McLean, Cunnington, and then you start going into Rosie, Butters, these kind of guys in your forward line, the space starts to run out pretty quick. Especially when you want to pick maybe forward rookies as well. So
yeah. Again, the rookies will dictate our structure a lot. So I'm not completely dismissing it. I personally, if I can, I would like to fill my midfielders with midfielders, but this year might be maybe a little bit of an exception to the rules.
We'll see. It's going to be dictated by rookies.
For sure. That'll do it for us today, guys. Make sure, again, if you are listening over on YouTube, make sure you hit that big old subscribe button. Hit the notification bell so that as soon as our videos go up, you can get notified. If you're following along on podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, would love it if you guys go over there and drop us a 5-star rating and review. We would love to hear what you guys are thinking of the podcast so far. If you are enjoying it, would love to hear that. It goes a long way to helping spread the love so that we can get our boy Selby on board, the GOAT, and everyone else, obviously, the general public listening along. But like we said, next time we're going to be talking about the mid-priced forwards, and then into the rucks. So again, make sure you guys like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.